Hello, I'm Gayle Fisher-Stewart, and a couple of weeks ago I posted a video which was a critique on American policing and the need for those with intimate knowledge of the system, current and retired police officers, to come forward and confess concerning the origins of policing and how those origins affect how policing is conducted today, with sometimes deadly results. And as a result of that video, I was asked for next steps. Where do we go from this point in time to a point where police-community relations are what they should be? I have to admit that long-term change requires time, commitment, and resources, and the acceptance of major risk. And a group I'm working with, a group of retired police officers, we have come together to actually develop those next steps. So what I thought I'd do to get the conversation going in the broader community, because it will only be in community that change will come about, when the police and the community come together as one, and I include the faith community, I thought that to get this conversation started, I would provide some interim steps, some baby steps. We must remember that our system of policing has as one of its guides the Metropolitan Police of London. And Sir Robert Peel, one of its founders, said that the public are the police and the police are the public. That the police are paid full time to do what the public or the community really has responsibility. This would be true community policing. However, as we well know, the community as a whole is either unwilling or unable to take the task of policing on, so we pay members of the community, members of our community, the communities in which we live, to do that job. The police are members of the community who have come forward, who have stepped up to take on the job of self-community control, self-control that the majority of the community really doesn't want or doesn't have the time to do. So, interim steps, baby steps. Number one, Ava DuVernay's documentary on the 13th Amendment is out on Netflix, and I watched it. And this should be required reading for anyone who calls himself an American and a lover of freedom. In the information promoting it, this documentary reframes American history and explores how the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which abolished slavery, led to an epidemic of mass incarceration in the United States because of a loophole. Yes, slavery was abolished, except in the case of having been convicted of a crime. This country can legally enslave you if you have committed a crime. And so after the end of slavery, which literally destroyed the economic system of the South, there was still a need for cheap or free labor. So laws were enacted that criminalized activities that should not have been criminal, such as being without a job. These nuisance laws enabled whites to, in effect, re-enslave black people, while also perpetuating the lie that blacks, particularly black men, were dangerous and needed to be controlled. And so we see the beginning of the mass incarceration of black men to steal their labor and to control and constrain their freedom. What's interesting about mass incarceration is that to enter the criminal justice system, we find that the police are the gatekeepers. It is difficult to get to the courts and the correctional system without going through the police. So the police have been part of this re-enslavement of people of color. So I'd recommend watching this film in community. Bring together the police in your community, members of the larger community, to include the faith community, and watch it together. As part of this process, I'd also ask you to like the Center for the Study of Faith and Justice at Calvary, which is my church, to like the center on Facebook, where I will list questions to guide the discussion. So please like the Center for the Study of Faith and Justice at Calvary. Number two, America is considered, and still is to some degree, a white man's country. And we have seen laws that protected white space, and people of color who entered white space did so at their own peril. I mean, just look at certain communities in our country where people of color are still not welcome. This protection of white space has morphed into stand your ground laws, also called shoot first laws. Laws that say a person doesn't have to retreat from an encounter that may or may not be dangerous or life-threatening and can use deadly force to protect that space. Trayvon Martin was a victim of Florida's Stand Your Ground law, and there are other states that have the law formally and others informally. To understand this law and how it came to be and how it negatively affects people of color, I'd like for you to read this book, Stand Your Ground: Black Bodies and the Justice of God by Kelly Brown Douglas. Reverend Douglas is also an Episcopal priest. Read this book again in community and discuss its implications for people of color in your community and the role that the police sometimes unwittingly play in maintaining and protecting white space. The second book I'd like for you to read is by Kenyatta Gilbert, a professor at Howard University Divinity School in Washington, D.C., and it's called A Pursued Justice: Black Preaching from the Great Migration to Civil Rights. It's really about how Black churches need to recover a prophetic voice that challenges injustice. You know, our Black churches began because of racism and discrimination in so-called white churches. And in the Black church, we found a Jesus who was a champion of the dispossessed, who lived in the margins, who was killed, lynched, if you will, because he challenged the status quo. Unfortunately, too many of our churches have lost that prophetic voice because that prophetic voice requires risks. And it will need to be reclaimed if our children are not having the same conversations we are having today. Again, read this book in community. It's not just for members of the faith community or people of color. It's for everyone who seeks justice in an unjust world. And on our Facebook page, I will include a link to the Department of Justice report on the Baltimore Police Department, which was investigated in the aftermath of the police killing of Freddie Gray. There will be certain pages I would like you to reflect on and ask yourselves, how can human beings do this to another human being? You will come to the conclusion that to do what you will read on these pages, a person of color must be dehumanized, must be defaced, made a thing, an object, which comes right out of the system of slavery. There is no other way another human being can look into the face, the eyes of another human being, and do some of the things that are recounted in this report. As an example, on page 32 of the report, the Department of Justice found that Baltimore Police Department officers frequently ignored legal requirements and strip-searched individuals prior to arrest, which is unconstitutional, and they did it in public view. In one case, the officers publicly strip-searched a woman following a routine traffic stop for a missing headlight. And I quote, "Officers ordered the woman to exit her vehicle, remove her clothes, and stand on the sidewalk to be searched. The woman asked the male officer in charge, 'I really got to take my clothes off?' The male officer replied, 'Yeah,' and ordered the female officer to strip search the woman. The female officer put on purple latex gloves, pulled up the woman's shirt, and searched around her bra. Finding no weapons or contraband around the woman's chest, the officer then pulled down the woman's underwear and searched her anal cavity. This search again found no evidence of wrongdoing, and the officers released the woman without charges. Indeed, the woman received only a repair order for her missing headlight. The search was conducted in full view of the street, although the supervising male officer claimed that he turned away and did not watch the violation, not only of the woman's body, but also of the U.S. Constitution. I mean, there is no indication that the woman had violated any law or was secreting any contraband. This was a routine traffic stop. In this case, the woman filed a complaint, and the male officer received only a simple reprimand and an instruction that he could not serve as an officer in charge until he was properly trained. Where did these officers learn that violations of human dignity and the Constitution were acceptable? And how do we ensure that these types of violations do not take place anywhere anymore in this country? As we seek to change American policing, there is a need, as I've offered before, that the police, particularly police leaders, police chiefs, step forward and admit that there is a problem and the problem needs to be fixed. All too often, the police, rather than confess so repentance can take place, circle the wagons and play the yes, but game, admitting that there might be a problem and then saying, but these officers who do these things are a few rotten apples, or but policing is tough, but officers put their lives on the line every day. And all of that is true. However, until the police are willing to cross the lines that divide them from the community of which they are a part, remember Sir Robert Peel, problems will only get worse. More and more of our young people will learn to fear the police, and the police will hesitate to take action when action is needed. Neither is good for our country. So I ask you to consider these interim recommendations to begin the conversation in earnest, and join me and this group of retired police officers who are working to make policing what it needs to be in a country that says it loves freedom. More to come later.